Hello and welcome to Security Scan. I am Vishal Dahiya and today we will discuss the process of modernization in Indian Army. Indian Army epitomizes bravery, sacrifice and professionalism. With changing times and warfare strategies, defense forces need to be modernized more effectively to counter the challenges along the border and also exigencies beyond the border. With India emerging as a global power, it has to build its military power to thwart fresh challenges arising out of the responsibilities. The 1.3 million strong army has been pressing for faster procurement of weapon systems in view of emerging threats to its security. Defence Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has already said that the modernization of the world's second largest army is a top priority for the government. Recent reports say that Indian Army has finalized one of its biggest plans for infantry modernization, under which a large number of light machine guns, battle carbines and assault rifles will be purchased at a cost of 40,000 crore rupees to replace its obsolete weapons. So what all is required for the modernization of Indian Army and how can it be achieved? For a detailed discussion on this, we have a distinguished panel of guests in the studio today with us. Let me introduce you them, starting with senior journalist Mr. Saikat Dutta. He is South Asia editor of Asia Times. We also have with us Captain Alok Bansal, director of India Foundation. Then we have retired Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia, Director of Centre for Joint Warfare Studies. And we will also be joined by Lieutenant General Satish Nambiar, distinguished fellow of IDSA on the phone line in a short while. Welcome all of you to the Rajya Sabha TV. Let me begin straight away with you, Saikat. Everybody recognizes the need for modernization of Indian Army. Almost all three wings, be it Navy, Air Force or Army. But now we're talking about the Army, so specifically the recent developments. The plans to procure all these small firearms or slightly mid firearms at a cost of 40,000 crore rupees. Now the figure seems a little huge, but then if you juxtapose it with the need for modernization in the army, it looks like a very small piece which is being done right now.
Let me start it this way, that modernization for the Indian infantry to start with, which is the core fighting arm, and we all have our biases, so I'm obviously biased towards the infantry. But when it comes to the infantry, the basic fighting soldier is the infantry, and their modernization has been lacking for a long time. And if you look at the available reports, this 40,000 crore addresses that need. Now let's look at the most basic requirement of a soldier, which is his or her rifle. And that rifle has been hanging fire for over 2 decades. The last time the Indian small arms system, also known as INSAS, came in 88, 89, it has, to my mind, by all accounts, a fairly decent design, but a complete failure as far as the Indian fighting man is concerned. So the rifle has been hanging fire for decades now. On top of it, you also need to modernize the Indian infantry soldier, because we are not only fighting in a networked environment where communication etc. is very important, but also a whole lot of other complexities like cyber security, drones, visualization, communication, everything has modernized.
So the entire package of the soldier has to undergo a change.
What we are currently talking about is only the basic small arms, which is their weapon, their submachine guns, their light machine guns and their assault rifles. And we are not even looking at the other things. There was a future infantry soldier program, but we have no clarity on when that will take off. So what we are looking at in one line is too little and too late, and needs to be done as of yesterday. Okay,
let me bring in Captain Bansal here. Captain Bansal, Saikat though had made his biases clear towards infantry. We are in fact beginning with infantry only, since the recent acquisition process deals with infantry. So what Saikat is pointing out here is there is a very pressing need for changing entirely the way our soldier looks right now, the infantry soldier, along with his armament, along with his gears, everything else.
Just give me a little bit of time. When you talk of army modernization, there are of course modernization requirements outside infantry also. We will not focus on it, but there is no doubt that artillery has been one of the very pressing requirements.
No, we'll definitely come to artillery as well.
Similarly in the field of armor, attack hapters, there are a lot of issues where I think there are crying need. But infantry undoubtedly is of course the most important. We'll come to it. See, one of the big problems has been that Indian Army has been manpower intensive. Let me tell you, in 70s and 80s, we used to call we are the 5th largest army. Today, we have become the 2nd largest army. It's not that we have increased exponentially. The others have reduced drastically. So that's important. We continue to emphasize on manpower. As a result, bulk of Indian Army's resources have been going on
to maintain that manpower.
to maintain that manpower, and as a result, you see the budgetary allocation, the capital budget has been actually very, very minuscule. And infantry weapons have really not kept pace with the changing scenario. More significantly, Indian Army soldier was deployed for counterinsurgency. Now, the requirements of a conventional battle, to my mind, and counterinsurgency are quite different. The weapons that you require for a CIE operation and for counterinsurgency and for CT, counterterrorism, etc., are quite different. When you are dealing with your own population, your own citizens, the requirements are different. When you are dealing with an enemy on the border, to my mind, the requirements are different. Consequently, we went in for a change of primary weapon from SLR, which was very heavy. We moved to INSAS, which, as Saikat say, has been a monumental failure. Though, of course, it was a wonderful design. I think if we would have actually looked into it properly at the right moment, probably modernization would have been feasible. There are some basic flaws, like the ejection cartridge hitting the soldier who's firing, etc. Now, these are major issues. A soldier who's firing on the border can't be worried about whether the ejection cartridge will come and hit him when he's taking aim. So, how does a soldier fight? Now, if these are the basic issues, something should have been done in so many years to modernize it. That's not been done. Now, having not been done, at least the basic weaponry of the soldier needs to be modified. The second thing is the battlefield scenario is changing. You need more modern gadgetry, you need night vision devices. The amount of load that a soldier is carrying has increased exponentially. With better technology, better sensors, you need interfaces, and that requires that the weapon should become lighter and lighter. And that brings me to the LMG. The next section weapon is light machine gun, which is again a very, very heavier weapon. I think we need to go for modernization of these weapons so that they become lighter, so that a section, which is the basic formation, has that much more mobility.
Okay, so making it a little more lighter for the soldier on the ground. Let me bring in Lieutenant General Vinod Bhatia here. General, both our panelists are pointing out here that, and everybody agrees to the fact as well, there is a pressing need, there have been flaws, there is a set mechanism which need to be put in place. We have been lacking at several places, several points, but where should be the focus right now, starting immediately? Infantry is one area where the focus seems to be, already with the 40,000 crore rupees plan. But apart from infantry, where can we?
First, I would like to say that having been a former DG infantry, the focus on infantry has not actually been there.
Okay.
When our DRDO is concerned, our focus on strategic things, and the focus should be on the infantryman. He's in contact every day of the year, whether it's CICT operations or the line of control or the line of actual control. We have to see our challenges, security challenges. Our security challenge is different from others, and seeing that the focus has to be on the head-to-heel equipping and arming of the infantryman.
Okay.
Our infantry is the most battle-hardened force in the world. It's combat-rich. But have we actually taken care of given the wherewithal to fight effectively? No. We have to minimize our casualties. We don't have body armor. We do not have a rifle which is actually worth mentioning. It's a piece of metal, as I call it. So we have to get our weaponry right. We got to get our head-to-heel right. I got to get my equipment which I carry. I have to carry a load on me. Even the carriage equipment, which you call the kit, the ICK, the infantry combat kit, is not there. The boots are not there. Can you imagine? The headgear is not there. You would have seen everyone wearing a patka. No, patka is not an issued item. So our helmet is heavy. So recently we've gone for the ballistic helmets after many, many years. So we have almost failed our infantrymen wherewithal is concerned. I think we have failed them. And I should also be taking the blame for it, having been a former DG infantry.
Okay, you've been a former DG infantry, so obviously your focus is more on...
No, not my focus is both, but that is one part of it. And now 40,000 crores has been given. The proof is in the pudding. Let's see when it comes. Cases have been going on for very long years. But I hope things will move. What has happened, the policies have been set, changed for the good. But with the policies, I think we also need to change the procedure and the processes. If the policy changes and the procedure and processes don't change, I think after another 3 years, we'll be discussing the same thing as we've been doing for many years now. Where is the weapon for the infantryman? And it's not only infantryman. What the infantryman gets is for the army. If there's 7 lakh weapons which are going to come, assault rifles which are going to come, that is not for the infantry alone, it is for the army, for the complete soldiers of for the armed forces. And of course, if this is good enough, it will also be taken by our Central Armed Police Forces.
Okay.
So we have to actually see where our daily needs lie.
Okay.
Our daily needs lie with the infantrymen. Our operational needs lie, of course, our artillery, our air defense, our mechanized infantry, armored fighting vehicles, our future infantry combat vehicles, our communication equipment. You name it, we all need it. But we had nearly a decade-long marking time where nothing came. Okay. So we have a long way to go, and we have to go immediately. That's getting a little worrisome now.
Okay, we have a long way to go, and undoubtedly everybody would agree on that. Let me bring in another guest, Lieutenant General Satish Nambiar, who is joining us on the phone line. General Nambiar, a concerted viewpoint which is coming across out here is that not much has been done. We've been waiting for quite long now, and procedures and processes need to be put in place to implement the policies which are being talked about. So which way can we move ahead so that we can move swiftly and achieve the targets which we have missed?
Yeah, well, in response to this, basically, I want to remind all of you, I retired 23 years back. It was a long time ago. I have seen and heard this now over a number of years. So to that extent, I can only say that, we've got to, even when you talk of modernization of the Indian Army, I think all of us and the viewers must recognize that for a country like ours to progress and provide a reasonable quality of life to its people, we have to have peace and stability in the subcontinent. And in the prevailing security environment, that is only possible if we have a professionally organized, trained, and well-equipped armed forces that provide credible deterrence against potential adversaries from launching military adventures against us. And of course, be able to deal effectively with internal security threats like terrorism and insurgency. To that end, I think modernization is not only necessary, but is vital. There cannot be a guns versus butter argument on this subject. We need both, and in equal measure. A country like ours cannot afford to hang its coattails on a foreign power for its security. And that, I think, is something which we need to bear in mind, because people like us, we have watched this process started in real earnest, I think, in the mid-1980s. It was stalled by the Bofors scandal, and that still haunts the process, unfortunately. And I would say that notwithstanding the initiatives over the last 3 decades, the process has been quite disappointing.
Okay.
And in that context, I agree with all my colleagues who are on this panel. While there is much glamour in air and naval platforms, tanks, missiles, and so on, the core of our capability has to be built, at least in the foreseeable future, on our infantry, both for war as also for internal security.
Okay.
And here I'm sorry to say it is inexcusable that in the 55 years since our sorry experience with the Chinese in 1962, we have not yet been able to provide the infantry with effective rifles, machine guns, and light machine guns, bulletproof jackets for counterinsurgency, counter-terrorist operations, helmets, clothing. I mean, it's absolutely unforgivable.
Okay.
And this is something that I think we must address. And the other point I entirely endorse in my years of experience is this aspect of our artillery requirements.
Okay.
That again is an unforgivable situation. The paralysis induced by the Bofors scandal it could well prove disastrous.
Okay.
We don't seem to have got over it. And the last point I wish to make, obviously I agree with the others that we have to talk in terms of tanks, both medium and light, infantry combat vehicles, both tracked and wheeled. But I think what disappoints me most is the final point I wish to make: the unforgivable neglect of our developing an indigenous capability in this regard, despite the existence of capacity, which I really think is quite unforgivable. And I think I think it needs to be supported by all of us, because all that our indigenous capability requires is support. And support for research. And
Okay. General Nambiar, it is quite clear you're pointing out, and everybody else before you had also said the same thing, almost in different words, that this is something which is unforgivable. We need to move forward. Moving on forward, we've spoken about infantry. Let me bring in Captain Bansal here. Captain Bansal, you're talking about artillery and other aspects as well. Infantry, yes, we seem to have two very informed versions out here. One former DG infantry and other one pointed out by Mr. Dutta. But in terms of our needs and requirements for artillery and other divisions such as mechanized infantry, how do you look at the situation presently?
See, I think as General Nambiar said, Bofors ghost continued to haunt the Indian armed forces, especially Indian Army. And the worst sufferer was the weapon which actually it dealt with, that is the artillery guns. We had in Kargil, during Kargil conflict, a strange phenomena of having guns without ammunition. So that Bofors, since we could not extricate ourselves, no artillery acquisition was made. And I think that's a gaping hole as far as Indian Army's capabilities are concerned. Similarly, in armor, though indigenization we went in for, I think there has always been a lobby in India which has been working against indigenous products. I think when it comes to indigenous products, we are unwilling to make any compromises, and standards and staff QRs very often keep changing from time to time. So that is there. I think I don't know whether I don't have the information per se, but I don't think so. Our armor requirement has also been met.
Okay.
Another issue which has always been hanging fire between Army and Air Force is the question of attack hapters. For long, Air Force opposed Army's acquisition of attack hapters. Fortunately, now it started. But I think more and more attack helicopters need to be acquired, and Army units it should go at least to lower levels, to lower formations of Army. They should start getting attack hapters so that concerted offensive or defensive operations could be planned in attack. Especially for offensive operations, you need attack hapters which could coordinate. Then of course there are issues with engineering equipment, and there are a lot of issues. But I tend to agree, the bulk of our army is infantry. That is actually the sword arm of the Indian Army. And it is unforgivable to say that the main weapon of an infantry soldier is still in limbo. The INSAS doesn't fire, INSAS, the soldier doesn't have confidence in INSAS. More importantly, we have not been able to provide him any armor protection, body armor, any sort of thing. In fact, to an outsider, it's so, it looks as if it's a criminal folly that a soldier goes to battle without any protection worthwhile. And as General Bhatia said, you look at the helmet. It's so unwieldy. The helmet which we have been wearing for last 4 or 5 decades or even longer, I think these are Second World War vintage helmets, which a man finds it very, very cumbersome and difficult to wear and go to battle.
Okay, let me bring in General Bhatia here. General Bhatia, Captain Bansal made a point about us not being very positively disposed towards the indigenous products. Do you agree with the viewpoint that we've not developed our capabilities in a way to cater to our needs indigenously? Our arms such as DRDO, OFB, DPSUs, they're not giving us very effective equipments.
Absolutely correct. You see, we don't have the defense industrial base. We have never let it grow, never let it develop. The DRDO focus is totally different. They can't even produce low grade items. 80% of the military hardware is low to medium technology. And even if we, I refuse to believe that in a country we lack the intellect and the scientific community cannot bring this out. So we need systematic changes and structural changes. The DRDO has to be responsive to the needs of the armed forces. The DRDO, OFB, DGQA, as I call it, the nexus, hasn't let us grow at all. And that is where I think structural changes are required. They need to operate and they need to be responsive, they need to be accountable, and they need to be answerable for not doing things. I'll give you a small example. A multi-mode grenade, since 1994 to 2017, we have not been able to develop multi-mode grenade. What's a grenade actually? And so that is the state of affairs. It's come in now after so long. And if that is the state of affairs, I think we need to take a look at our structures, and DRDO has to be responsive to the needs of the armed forces. And we should not look at RT alone, infantry alone. I think it is incorrect. We look at the armed forces as a package,
a whole unit.
as a package. You see, you cannot have the infantry getting strong and the armor getting weak, the army getting weak and the navy getting strong. Well, we have to look at our defense needs in a holistic manner.
Okay.
And the problem is their competing priorities for money.
Okay.
Now the competition cannot be intra-arm.
Cannot be, obviously cannot be. It has, we have to look at it as an entire package.
Yeah. Security is a challenge for the nation. It is not a challenge for the infantry.
Let me bring in Mr. Dutta here. Mr. Dutta, looking at everything which we're talking about, be it indigenous products, be it the lack of decisions being taken, policy decisions can be taken. But my question to you is that the processes and the procedure which we follow, that also seem to have been completely flawed. So what can we do now to improve that procedure and that process? Because everything which we are talking about right now can only be achieved by adopting a proper procedure and a process.
I'll break it up into 3 distinct points. One, in the development cycle, you will have some wins and you will have some losses. For example, the British Army, they developed the SA-80 rifle, which more or less everybody in the British Army accepts is a failure, but they're still soldiering on with the SA-80. So we'll have to have that patience to know that sometimes we'll be successful, sometimes we'll be unsuccessful. The second part is, when we look at it from that perspective, DRDO, to my mind, and I'm sorry to say this, has been unmitigated failure on almost all aspects. And as a result, they have weakened the case of indigenization. I have always been a strong proponent of indigenization. Okay. But that indigenization does not work if you are completely unaccountable to the forces you are supposed to serve. And in that case, DRDO has been an unmitigated failure.
Okay.
And the last point that I want to bring in is that there's also a lot of confusion about where do we want to go. As an army, what do you want the army to do? One day you want the army to fight CI, then another day you want them to do surgical strikes, third day you want them to go far away from Indian shores and take out some airborne operation, etc. Now, each one, as our threat perceptions change and our strategic interests expand, will have their own requirements. We need to understand and plan for wars of the future, which means we don't look back to 1985, but we look at 2025, 2050 to start planning, and therefore buy and plan and manufacture the equipment we need for those wars, rather than constantly looking back and ending this confusion.
Okay. Looking at the future perspective, let me bring in Captain Bansal here, and we will go to General Bhatia also for the final comment on this. Captain Bansal, all of this boils down to one thing, and that is, where is the money to do all this? Now, if you look at the budgetary allocations, it's a very important aspect. We have the last budget was somewhere around 1.6% of the GDP was the defense budget. Saikat committee had spoken about something known as roll-on budget, where if you haven't spent it this year, it can be added on to your account next year. One, how feasible is this? Two, can we achieve all this in the current allocation?
See, firstly, unlike 80s, when you had a real budget crunch and the services were starved of essential funds, that situation doesn't prevail. Okay. I think every essential requirement of services, they get it. They're not starved for funds. The problem is of procedures, as General Bhatia said. We have a strong bureaucratic stranglehold on the Ministry of Defence. Unfortunately, that has not given way. Irrespective of change of ministers, irrespective of Subramaniam committee reports, Naresh Chandra committee reports, you can have thousands of reports, but that stranglehold is not showing. Now, that stranglehold ensures that bulk of the money that's allocated doesn't get spent. And now, that's where Saikat committee's report that the unspent amount should be carried forward is the right step.
Okay.
But I'm sure the bureaucracy will not let it go. And that's what is happening. It's not happened till now. So as long as we cannot break this bureaucratic stranglehold, where a postal service officer tomorrow becomes defense secretary or becomes a JS or a director in the Ministry of Defense, you can't break this stranglehold. You need somebody who should at least know what Siachen is, or what a ship is, or what a submarine is. If he doesn't know the basics, how can he come and pontificate on whether this is required or not required?
Okay, let me bring in General Bhatia for a final comment on this. General Bhatia, what is your viewpoint in terms of budgetary allocation, one, and in terms of the procedures and processes we need to, improve upon to move ahead and achieve all these goals?
As the budgetary allocation concerned, the national competing priorities. So it is up to the national polity to decide how much they can spare for the armed forces and what are their priorities actually. Definitely more budget is required. Not only more budget required, judicious spending is required, and we have to align the authority and accountability. Today the authority is with the Ministry of Defence, the accountability of the service chiefs. I do not know how this is going to work for many years now.
Okay.
And I was a member of the Saikat committee also. Jan Saikat committee, I think I must say, has done a great job. And they have looked into all these aspects, including the procedure processes, what we were talking about, indigenization, developing a defense industrial base.
There are several recommendations.
Oh, there are 200 odd recommendations. What is accepted low-hanging fruit? It only pertains to the army. What pertains to the DRDO, the OFB, the DGQA, the CGDA, the defense accounts, that has not been accepted. So if that was to be accepted, I think it would definitely make a change, because it addresses the procedure and the processes rather than the policy only. It has recommended structural changes, systematic changes, a total integration of the armed forces and the Ministry of Defense. It has, all these are recommendations, 200 odd recommendations are there, but they have not been implemented. What Captain Bansal is saying, absolutely correct. The stranglehold of the Ministry of the Armed Forces, that needs to break out. And we have to look at, our nation as a whole, our security challenge as a whole. We cannot say, okay, this is what it is and this is what it is. Align accountability and authority. Make your changes, be self-sufficient. Strategic autonomy is not only not having alliance with A country, B country, C country. Strategic autonomy is me being self-sufficient, self-independent in my defense needs also, in my scientific needs also.
Okay, so clearly it seems, and as it is pointed by our panelists, that the security challenges is one thing which we should be looking at to try and modernize our armed forces, and we should look at this entire concept in a holistic manner, and we should also aim at improving the procedures and processes involved to implement the policies which seek to achieve the goals which we are talking about in terms of modernization of armed forces. We'll come back again next week with a different topic and different set of guests. Till then, keep watching Rajya Sabha Television.